Today is May 24th, 1917. My name is Burt and Grad. I'm conducting an oral history interview of Jonathan Seybold. This is part of the ongoing oral history program of the Software Industry Special Interest Group, which is part of the Computer History Museum. We are here in the special oral history studio of the Computer History Museum, and we'll start in at this point in time. Jonathan, you've had quite a career, and you've made an incredible difference in both the newspaper world and in the even more so in the desktop publishing world. But I'm going to go back to the beginning and start from you when you were first born. My record shows, if you're willing to have me put it on record, is that you were born in 1942.
That's right.
Where were you born?
Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, the hospital. My parents were living in suburban Philadelphia.
That's part of the main line, isn't it?
Part of the main line. They were actually, my father had been teaching previously at Swarthmore College, teaching economics at Swarthmore College. During the war, he was, I think, the regional director of the War Labor Board in the Philadelphia area. So they were still living in the Swarthmore area.
You grew up, what did your mother do?
My mother was, she was a full-time mother, a housewife, until the kids were grown. She had been an art history major in college, and then she went back after the kids left the nest, went and got a master's in library science. That's what she wanted to do, and she helped with libraries for a good deal of her life after that.
Give me the names of your parents.
John Warren Seybold is my father, and Gertrude Blood Seybold is my mother.
And had they been in the United States a long time?
Yeah, this is, at several points along our family history, people have gone out and looked for sort of family roots and so forth. I mean, there are all these legends that get passed down, and you hear the stories. I mean, the most ironic one is my middle name is Webster. And one of my ancestors is Noah Webster of the dictionary. Okay, I'm a terrible speller.
Oh my!
Yes,
he would be disappointed.
I didn't get those genes.
Noah would be disappointed in you.
But when they went back in the history, my father's family were all people who came pretty early. My mother's mother was second generation Irish.
So you weren't an immigrant family or one of those
No.
case. How long did you live in the Bryn Mawr area?
Oh, I lived in the Swarthmore area. Okay.
Swarthmore.
That's where I grew up. I went to Swarthmore High School. I went to Swarthmore School System, Swarthmore High School. So I grew up in suburban Philadelphia all my life. And in fact, a major motivation for wanting to be an exchange student my senior year in high school was I'd grown up in suburbia in a town of 5,000 people where, everybody, there was almost no change in sort of population. So the school social structure sort of got set in kindergarten, continued all the way through. But more than that, it was 1950s America, and it felt really, really stifling.
What do you mean by stifling? You've used that word with me before.
Very conformist. Very conformist, racist, misogynist. My parents were Quakers. They converted. They'd both gone to Swarthmore College. They converted. They were active in civil rights stuff. They were active in social kinds of things. We were, as a family, we were at odds with society to that extent, and so it always felt that you were in this sort of unnatural bubble. One of the things that people forget or don't realize is that the 1950s were a really exceptional time in U.S. history. We were the only industrial country left standing after the war, and it was a time in which you could be a factory worker doing fairly menial stuff and be middle class. It was a time when we had the lowest proportion of women in the workplace of any decade in the 20th century. It was a very unusual time, and it's always struck me as odd that some portion of our population looks back at that as saying that was normal. Okay, that wasn't normal, that was abnormal.
You went to, one of the things I always ask in this, what particular subjects in school did you particularly enjoy, and what kind of hobbies and activities did you have when you were a high school student and so forth?
I could afford to be a lazy student in high school. It was a good high school, but I was good enough in everything that it didn't really require much work.
Were there any you particularly liked? Sciences, literature, history, any of those things?
I really enjoyed everything. Okay.
You were good. You were an A student, I assume,
Yes.
in spite of not working hard.
Right, but you know, it was sort of in, at least, it was assumed that that's what you would be. It wasn't anything that anybody thought it was exceptional. I assumed that's what you would be. And in fact, when I came to apply to college, and this actually applied to both of my daughters, it's changed now, but it never occurred to me I couldn't get into a college because I was good enough at doing this stuff that wasn't ever an issue. It's only when I got to college I had to learn how to work.
But always, the economics were not a question in terms of you're going to college. That was always assumed.
The high school I graduated from a school in the U.S. and one in Paris, we'll get to in a second. But in both cases, the students who didn't go to college out of those high schools were the exception. Right. There were very few.
What were your non-academic activities while you were in high school?
Sports. Even though I was small, I was fast. I played football until, unbelievably, until I got injured too badly. I have a back problem the rest of my life from doing it. Now, they always joke that the average weight of the team dropped by 10 pounds when I was playing. Football actually ended up being important in my life because to be successful at that required a lot of determination. Okay, it really rewarded being tough, being persistent. We had a small high school. We were playing against bigger teams. We usually won in the last quarter because we were in better shape than they were.
Mm. Now, during all this period, your father was still a professor at Burt?
No, after the war, he did two things. He was a labor arbitrator, and I went on some of his arbitration things from time to time, which was fun. And he was also became the executive director of the Printing Industries of Philadelphia, which was the trade association for the printing trades in that area, which was a pretty big industry in that area. And a lot of what he did involved labor relations. A lot of what he did involved the call at 2 o'clock in the morning from somebody who had just gotten sugar put in his gas tank by the Teamsters. So I sort of grew up with that environment with that sort of thing. He had written his dissertation. He finally got his PhD in 1950 or something. He'd written his dissertation on the 1948 typographers' strike, which was the seminal thing in the U.S. printing industry. It's a nationwide strike, and it shut everything down.
Why the printing industry for your father?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, I think
there was no family or historic connection
nothing.
To your knowledge.
I think it must have been from contacts with the War Labor Board. It must have been because he was working with all these people.
That would certainly have been a major. They were a major union in the Philadelphia area.
That's right.
They really were.
Yeah.
Huh. That's an interesting thing. I hadn't thought of that. Okay, anything in your life? Well, he's doing this kind of arbitration. Does that affect you? Do you get interested in the printing industry? Is there something like that?
It sort of was always there. I mean, it's the sort of thing you knew about these things because it was always there. But it wasn't. I didn't go off and set type or anything of this sort. The hobby at home, which I've always kept up, he had a darkroom, and I learned photography very early. And making prints and dodging things and everything else. So I've been taking pictures all my life since that time.
So there's a photographic connection there in that regard.
That's right. That's right.
How about the newspaper at the school? Anything of that sort?
Nope. No.
So,
and in fact, interesting thing was, let's fast forward in this. When I graduated from college, I realized that even though I was an economics major, honors in economics and all that sort of stuff, between English and French, I'd actually taken a fair number of courses in college that involved writing. Okay, and just because they were interesting courses and there was explored ideas and so forth, I had no idea that I would spend so much of my life writing. You follow the things that interest you, and if you're lucky, you begin to put together a life that uses those things.
And we'll talk about that further, but I think seeing an opportunity, being able to make it work for you, makes such a difference for so many of us.
Yeah.
Certain things resonate, and then if we're good, we're able to make them work.
And I don't know why. For me, I would, all my life, I've had like deciding that I really wanted to get out of there and go overseas. It was, you make a decision, you make it, and you're clear that's what you want to do, and that's what you set out to do.
So tell me about, you end up leaving, going out to France?
I went to Holland
as
an exchange student. I'd had German in high school, so I had some leg up in learning Dutch. And I lived with a family that was a marvelous experience. And it was a lifetime experience. I arrived in Europe still with the ravages of World War II visible and the scars visible. And that was something that was really important to me, because from that point on, I had a much more global view, international view of things than I would have had if I had not done that.
But you're saying this is almost, 15 years later, 14 years after the end of the war, you still saw a lot of the
there was still rubble in Rotterdam. They cleared a lot of stuff out and they built some new stuff, but there's still sections that were rubble. I arrived in June and spent the summer basically getting acclimated and learning Dutch and so forth. We went for a camping trip as kids into Belgium, and the little town next to the campsite we were in, there were bullet holes in all the buildings.
You opened the door. Tell me about siblings. You had 2 siblings?
There were 3 of us. I was the oldest. My brother Andrew was the middle one, and my sister Patty was the youngest one.
Age range?
Basically 3 years apart. We were 4 years apart in school. I was 4 years ahead of my brother in school because just where our birthdays fell, but it was sort of roughly every 3 years. And they both went to the Swarthmore schools as well. But then after I was in Holland, it was the school program then was, but they changed later, took you through the first semester of your senior year, and you're supposed to go back and finish at your U.S. high school to get a U.S. degree, the second half. But while I was there, my father, who was head of the personnel committee for the American Friends Service Committee, they had an opening in Paris for a position, a 2-year stint position there that they couldn't fill, and he was interested in it, and I was writing letters back, and he was getting very intrigued about having the whole family have European experience. So he took a leave of absence from his job and went to Paris, arriving in Paris in January of 1960, and so I went from Holland to Paris, and ended up the second half of my senior year in the American Community School in Paris.
So you still could get a U.S. degree that way.
I ended up getting a U.S. degree, and I got it because the credits got transferred. I also got a diploma from my U.S. high school as well, so I got 2 high school diplomas. But that was, we were in Paris in 1960. It was still the end of the 50s in Paris. There was, very few people had cars. There was still in the recovery from the war. We had the run. We were, kids. We had the run of the city. And it was a marvelous group, 22 or so people, very, very diverse people. We're still friends with most of them. And that was, that was exhilarating.
You had to learn French?
Yeah.
Were you able to while you were there?
You
were only there 6 months, that's why I was wondering.
I was there 6 months, well actually through the summer, 6 months or so, and then back the next summer. No, I didn't learn French. I didn't take French, I just got all the other stuff taken care of. I didn't take French until I got to college.
So being in an American school, you didn't need the French on day-to-day for the educational purpose.
You just need a little bit of French to get around in the city. Yeah.
Any particular story about either the end of high school there in Holland or in Paris?
There were a couple of high school teachers that made a big impression on me. The first one was the physics teacher I had in high school in the U.S. And he focused, his emphasis was understanding the principles. If you understand the principles, you can work everything else. And basically, I ended up doing that all my life. If I could understand the basic principles of something, you could deduce the rest. And when I got to Holland, I found myself tutoring Dutch students in physics who had had like 4 years of physics because they'd been taught by rote, and I'd been taught to sort of get in and understand the fundamental principles. And it was a whole different way of learning.
I agree completely. The other thing you seem to have done later in your life is structure. You put frameworks, you put organization around information.
I have always, everybody's mind works differently. I have always found that I see patterns in all kinds of things. I'll come into, well, later in life, I come into a trade show and I walk around, see what people are doing, and somehow trends, patterns, things sort of organize themselves in my mind. And I assumed that was normal, but I found that other people weren't doing it. But if you sort of lay it out to them, they say, "Oh yeah."
You read something. The word pattern has, to an artist, pattern has one kind of a meaning. Yeah. To a person who's a photographer, it has another kind of meaning. To a director, it's a third. I see tables. I see spreadsheets. This is the way I dream spreadsheets. Do you have a picture that shows up when you think of patterns?
That's a good question. I don't have a mental picture.
So it's not a visual thing.
Not a visual thing. I mean, I love sitting and listening to a lecture on something I don't know much about. And if it's an interesting lecture, I find myself listening to it and drawing connections between what I'm hearing there and other things. Okay, so it's if you will, it's more like diagrammatic. You've got a box here and a box here and a box here, and you sort of draw connections.
But you don't see the boxes.
No.
It's interesting because I've had very people in these. I've done a number of these interviews, and it's one of the things I'm always interested in. These people obviously are all top people in the computer field and so forth, the software, and invariably they have some form of patterning or structuring. Yeah. And it's been interesting to see what they have to say.
It's fascinating to me that everybody's mind seems to work differently.
It does.
And I mean, I discovered at one point that I dream in movies, to the point that I can do flashbacks, I can stop them and rewind them and so forth. And I've always wondered, do I do that because I grew up in a cinematographic world and therefore that informed how I think? Or was there something natural about the way people think in that? I have no idea.
We have no idea. Let's go to your college experience. You come back to the States to go to school. And say, were you an active Quaker personally, or if I may ask?
I was in a youth group in Swarthmore, and I went to the meetings and so forth. I didn't do much after that. I went to meetings a little bit in college, but it was basically too political, and I stopped doing it. One more thing in high school that's crucial here. The teachers at the American Community School were these amazing people who were there because they were in Paris, and they were and two of them stand out in my mind. One was the math teacher, our final exam was basically mythical creatures whose behavior could be described by mathematical formulas, and that was lots of fun. Wow. The English teacher. When I had to get there, I had to catch up to get the midterm exam, because I was coming into school just before the midterms, and they'd been doing Hamlet, and so he had me get the notes from his best student, who ended up being my wife, and then I had one-on-one sessions with him, and one of them stuck in my mind when we were talking. I forgot who it was. Motivations for someone taking some actions, because he taught Shakespeare as a window into the human condition, not as just literature. And he said, why did this person assume that person was going to behave in a certain way, which he wasn't going to? And I said, I didn't know. And he said, because that's what he would have done if he were in that situation. And something about that just completely clicked with me, that it sort of solidified the sense that I have that you always need to be able to see the world through somebody else's eyes. Okay? And over the years, I learned that ironically, that's easier to do if you have some separation from that person or that situation. The closer you get, the more intimate you are, the more you have to remind yourself of that, the harder it is.
Interesting. Let's move ahead then. Talk about college. You decide to come back to the United States for college, was that?
Mm-hmm.
And you go to Oberlin.
I applied to Harvard to prove I could get in. But I didn't want to go there. I went to Oberlin. It was besides being a really great college at the time, it was also on the forefront of social change. I was very deeply involved in the civil rights movement. And I was an economics major. I hadn't planned to do that. I had no plan coming into college. But that really drew me because it combined my sort of interest in society and social things with the technical. And that combination, I felt very comfortable with both of those kinds of things. And so that seemed sort of like a natural place to go.
So it wasn't, did you see it in terms of what kind of a job you might do?
You didn't, you basically at college, at least at those times, I mean, people were much more career-oriented then. We were just soaking things up and trying to learn what we could learn. I mean, I ended up going to graduate school with zero effort. I mean, I was handed off from Oberlin to Yale without even applying, because the chairman of the department at Oberlin, Ben Lewis, was internationally known, and every once in a while he'd recommend students, and if he did, they would take them, and he recommended 2 that year.
You obviously did very well in college then at Oberlin.
Yeah, at first, so I had to learn to work the first 2 years. I had never actually had to study. I never had to actually work before. But I got that, and I was top 10 senior class and highest honors in economics.
Again, any particular subjects in economics that resonated with you, or in other areas?
I really enjoyed the economics. My honors dissertation was actually on labor economics. There was a big debate at that time about the discouraged worker theory, about whether if employment goes up, do more people come into the labor force. And I did statistical analysis of the 1960 census data that was a cross-section in time, and found marvelously good correlations. And that was my first use of computers.
Had your father started ROCAPPI by that point in time?
He started ROCAPPI when I was a senior in college. They started doing the first programming. They produced the first work got produced after I was in graduate school.
I was trying to see the timing there. Yeah. So many people 10 years earlier than you felt you had to have a job getting out of college. You had to know you had to have a skill that you knew you could sell. And,
this was a matter. This wasn't even a thought thing. It was a matter that you come out of college and you went to graduate school if you were in the top part of the class, and as I say, it was remarkably. I feel very guilty about this, dropping out of graduate school, because you only had a few places. People came there from all over the world. I didn't work to get in there, and then from their standpoint, I threw it away. But what I did get out of that, the big thing we learned in graduate school, at least the first year, was that you could demolish almost any argument by looking at the hidden assumptions. You pull those out, and most of these elaborate sort of constructs of views of the world begin to collapse.
You're absolutely right. I've seen that in a statistical field. During the war, they used what they call the Dodge-Romek tables in order to determine which lots went forward and which lots should fail. Yeah. And when I first job at GE, I was working with a professor from the University of Iowa, from Ames, Iowa, and he was proving that the Dodge-Romek tables were completely wrong, because he assumed that the cost of putting a bad lot out was about the same as rejecting a good lot. And he said, no, if it's in an airplane and that bad part works, the cost is pretty much higher. That's right. So, and your point is exactly, the assumptions are that we take for granted.
That's right, exactly.
Is what throws us off. It's a way of thinking that you're describing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Now here you're, let's see, in 1965, you're 23 years old.
I was 22 when I left graduate school.
Okay. And so, why did you leave graduate school?
there's a double thing here. The first thing is economics was, I was the first year to get a National Science Foundation Fellowship for economics. It was always been hard science before that. That should have been a warning. Because what I discovered in graduate school was there was, at that point, a move to try to turn economics into physics. Okay, and what happened in that was that meant you had to be able to quantify everything to put it into formulas. And unfortunately, it was very clear to me that a lot of the really important things were not quantifiable and therefore were exogenous to the models. Okay? And they were basically still assuming that human beings are rational and human beings are not rational. So I would have been trying to make my way in a field in which I was already at odds with some of the sort of mainline thought in that field at the time. Easier to do when you're established, harder to do when you're starting out. But more importantly, I'd done the stuff with computers when I was in college. I'd been following this, what my father was doing. I was convinced that computers were going to get better and better and better. And I had, in college, what struck me was, from economic history in particular, was the importance of information and the importance of education. And what I saw was that we could take computers, we could program all the craft skills required to make information public into the computer, and we could democratize the distribution and publishing of information.
This was something you saw at that point in time, or is this something you saw later?
No, something I saw then. Okay, and if you project it, we were talking about doing words now, but there's no reason, if the technology kept getting better and better, why you wouldn't be able to encompass illustrations, pictures, motion pictures, sound, everything. And so you could see how you could start with print and go all the way through the entire chain of how people communicate.
Let's stay with that. Was this something you think you picked up from your father, or is this something you picked up on your own?
That was just
That's a fairly mature vision and for a person who's young man of 22 years old.
Well, it was a matter of, economic history, they had us reading papers, things, East India papers and things of this sort. There was a lot of detailed stuff in it, terribly taught. But it gave me a chance to sort of ask myself questions about, okay, Japan went from a feudal country in the middle 19th century to fighting wars against Russia at the turn of the century and winning, and fighting a war against the U.S. less than a century later. Okay? No natural resources. How did that happen? The thing that people weren't sort of focusing on, 19th century Japan was the most literate country in the world. Okay? They had a hardworking, disciplined, literate population. Human capital was what they built on. So those kinds of things were jumping out at me, and that's why I started to put this up together.
Computer experience during your college years or prior to that?
We didn't touch computers during college. Well, during college I did, because I had to do the dissertation. Okay, and we tried to do it. I worked with a professor, and we tried to do it initially at an IBM computer at a steel plant in Lorain, Ohio, that was programmed with actually plugboard type stuff, and it just wouldn't do the job. But because ROCAPPI was starting, and they didn't have any computer or anything yet, they had computer time for doing debugging programs and so forth. So I got a slot of computer time at 2 o'clock in the morning at RCA in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and wrote a little program that formatted the stuff for. They had a Russian analysis program that was part of the suite they had, so I didn't have to do a whole lot to program to do that. Wrote a program, never had a chance to debug it. Okay, you got one shot, so you're really careful about what you do. Fortunately, it wasn't a very difficult program, and went in, fed the cards in that had my program in it, and then I had these boxes and boxes of cards that had been punched up at the data center, which was a tabulation thing at the college, and through the card reader. And I will admit now, one of the cards tore in going through the card reader. So there's a data point that never got in there.
That's an interesting story. I'm going to move ahead. ROCAPPI, your father had started the company.
Yep.
Without going deeply into it, I'm going to push by some areas where you have a lot of documented material, or you've talked about it at yesterday's conference on desktop publishing. So talking more about you and how you solve problems and how you did things rather than the details. So he starts ROCAPPI.
Right.
Why?
Because he, again, going back to the typographer strike, he had seen there had been 2 commercial uses of hyphenation justification at that point. This is talking about very early 80s. One was at the LA Times on an IBM computer. One was at the West Palm Beach Times in Florida on an RCA 301 computer. And that was just hyphenation and justification of wire service copy to drive line casters. Very, very simple stuff. But he saw that you had the potential of, if you put stuff into the computer, you could do commercial quality work, you could do hyphenation justification, page makeup, you could store stuff, you could update it, you could put it out in different forms at different times. So he saw the potential to do that with text.
Stay with me a minute. Here's a gentleman who had been a professor at a college for many years, was a Quaker, took an assignment of American Friends, did War Labor Board. All these kinds of things are really not very commercial in the normal sense of the word. He then became an arbitrator, and obviously was making money doing that.
Right.
But all of a sudden he's starting a business, becomes an
This was
entrepreneur.
partly his son's urging, because he kept trying to get people to do this, and I kept saying to him, "It's such a great idea, do it yourself."
So he can blame you for starting ROCAPPI?
I'm sure I wasn't the only one. But basically, I think it was partly my pushing and partly his frustration that nobody wanted to do this.
So he's a man now, in his 50s probably, and he takes the leap of faith of starting a business?
Yeah.
Where does the...
And not only that, but a business that turned out not to be profitable for a long time and was a financial burden.
Well, this is my question. Taking that leap when you've been basically, I gather he was making money fairly consistently as an arbitrator.
Sure. And he was making a nice salary as the director of this association.
Yeah.
But he'd been doing that for years. And that's something that I sort of, I'm the same way. You do something for too long, the challenge goes out of it. So you need to expand. You need to move on. You need new challenges.
But you have a family. Well, he didn't. He had still 2 kids that he had to support.
That's right.
I mean, you were supposedly.
My mother thought it was a crazy thing to do.
That's what I was wondering. Thank you.
That was
very
a
much.
problem.
That was the problem. I did somewhat the same by leaving IBM at 50 years old and going out and starting my own consulting practice. And my wife and children who were still in the house were somewhat aghast at that decision. So he starts it.
So I started, and basically in a startup environment, what happens is you do everything that needs to be done.
Stop. I want to go a different route. Do you then, how you make the decision to join him?
Well, because as I said, I saw, this the sort of revelation to me about what the potential came really right towards the end of my first year in graduate school. I suddenly could see very clearly that this could happen. And here was a chance to be part of what could be a profound technological revolution. And I could, and rather than teach economics to college students someplace, I could be part of a revolution. Okay, and that was just compelling.
He started in '63, the fall of '63. Right. And you joined in June of '65. So he had already been working on the thing. Had you been working with him? Had you worked any summer? No. You hadn't done anything there.
No, the summer. I'm thinking
summer of '64. I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I'm trying. Summer of '64. I was in New Haven because you had to. I had to. One of the I had to do a summer crash course in German. I wasn't worried about passing the French, but they're the language requirements for reading economics in graduate school, and you needed 2 languages. French was going to be easy for me, German I hadn't done since high school, so I took a crash course in German that summer.
Okay. So you had no work with ROCAPPI?
No.
And had you talked with your father much during that time about
Yeah,
the company?
I went back on vacations and we talked about stuff and I'd seen this things and so forth, but I was not involved with
Did
it.
he invite you or did you invite yourself in?
I said to him that this is what I really want to do. And he said that he would love me to come, so I did.
Always a risky proposition going to work for your father.
It is. It is. And,
Or your mother, I guess, as well.
And it was, that going to the future, that's part of the reason later on I went to California, because that you'll always be the son to a certain extent. In his case, it was a matter of not showing favoritism. So what I did there, I had to earn.
And we're going to make this relatively brief because we've talked about some of these things. Did you consider any alternatives, any place else you wanted to work?
No, because this is the only company in the world that was doing this. Okay, this was absolute cutting edge.
But you're a college student. You don't know the rest of the world. You have limited information. It's all funneled through what you hear from your father. Come on.
I knew enough. I mean, I knew through him because he'd looked at things thoroughly. I knew from him the outlines of what was being done elsewhere. Okay, we knew about MIT. We knew about Palm Beach. We knew about, and we knew that. So we knew those things. And there was nobody doing anything remotely like what he was doing.
That's great, and that you're aware. Again, I think about your age, and I think that you're what, 23?
22.
Still 22 when you leave Yale.
Yeah.
So you were a young student there.
I'm 22 and I'm married.
Oh, you got married. Tell me a little bit. I have that down for later, but let's do it now.
I met. So there was another student in the high school, and I met her my first day in the high school. We became a couple. There were actually two couples in the class. This is pretty remarkable. And, we were friends to this day. And so, we dated through high school, and then she went off to Mount Holyoke, and I went to Oberlin, and then she eventually, her parents didn't approve of this, so they pulled her out of Mount Holyoke after a couple of years.
I'm sorry?
They pulled her out of Mount Holyoke after a couple of years and sent her to University of Florida. And so she accelerated her course there. And when she graduated in January of 93, she came up, she graduated in December of 93. She came up to the Philadelphia area on Christmas vacation, and we got married in January.
That was January 63, 64?
64.
64. Her name, please?
Patricia Maston.
Spell the last name?
Maston.
And her family was from where?
Well, her father was second generation Lithuanian, and her mother was third generation Italian.
Ah, interesting combination. And with your background, that makes a wonderful mixture for children later on.
Mm-hmm.
Did your parents approve of the marriage?
I don't think, I never gave them a choice. So, I mean, I don't think that I never asked them, and they never, this is what I want to do, and they supported it.
No negative.
Yeah.
Where did you locate when you were working for ROCAPPI? Where were you living?
Right, we had an apartment right in the area. Right
And where, though?
Well, ROCAPPI was actually in Springfield, which was one side of Swarthmore, and we were on the other side of the town, so we were 4 miles away or something. And she was teaching in the local schools. She taught schools. She taught high school, junior. She taught junior high school and high school when we were in New Haven, and she ended up teaching elementary school, 5th grade, when we were in Swarthmore.
Let's move ahead on that. We'll talk about children and so forth later on. Fairly briefly, let's talk about what you did at ROCAPPI. What is GCA? You mentioned that.
Okay, so
what does it stand for?
Let me get to that in a second. Let me just say what I did. I started to say when you have a startup company, you end up doing whatever needs to be done, and that's what I was doing. Okay? And you sort of evolve into people doing sort of assuming responsibility. And so I started out doing whatever needed to be done, wherever there were problems, and sort of ended up, as I got trained and learned more and more about this stuff, I ended up, within a few years, basically being in charge of all the software development reported to me, the choice of hardware reported to me, any special projects I did, I was in charge of, and several major accounts. And I will say, getting back to your thing about the industry, we had we had hired a guy who was a typographic salesman named Hans Weiss, who knew more about typesetting and printing than any human being I've ever encountered. And I just learned everything from Hans in terms of the whole, I mean, if I didn't, he'd take me around to show me stuff. He knew, he had a real engineering kind of mind, so which sort of fit with mine, so we could talk about not only what things were doing, but the mechanics of it and why it was done this way and what the constraints were, so to really get steeped in the craft that you're trying to automate, you're trying to replace.
Who were your clients?
Clients were major New York publishers, McGraw Hill, Holt Rinehart, Winston, Christian Science Church, Ford Motor Company.
And what were you selling?
Chrysler, excuse me. Federal Mogul Corporation, National Geographic. Okay.
What were you selling them?
We were selling them basically that all of them produced typeset output and some of the stuff, the range of things was, say the book publishers were publishing books, and we tended to want to look for books that were going to be revised and updated so that being on the computer was an advantage. Okay. The other people were publishing things that, for what some data manipulation plus typesetting was useful. Okay, your parts catalog, we did the first library catalogs. We did map index for National Geographic. It was a big project.
You say we did. What does that mean, you did?
Basically, we thought, my father thought when he started out he could be a trade shop and a service bureau for trade shops. It didn't work. We had to deal with the publishers. We had to go in and understand their problem and say, okay, for this kind of work, we have a solution that is that takes you into a new realm you didn't have when you were just sending things out to be typeset. Okay, and here are the advantages, and here's what putting this stuff through the computer can do for you.
What did you build on the computer to enable you to do it, or did you get programs from other people?
We wrote.
I don't mean you personally. I meant the company.
We wrote everything. We had to write our own assembler because the RCA one was terrible. We wrote our own sort program.
You were using the RCA 301? Go ahead.
Okay. So every piece of software was written by us.
What kind of language? Assembler and everything?
Assembler. Look,
this is the 1960s. We already had COBOL. We had a lot of languages.
We had a 20K 6-bit machine. Okay. The first time we assembled the main hyphenation program, it didn't fit in memory. Okay. We spent time crafting stuff.
You were short of money? Is that why you had such a lousy machine?
Well, the economics of this says the computer has got to be cheap. Okay.
So you were going to deliver the machine program to do this, or someone was going to deliver the machine?
No. We were a service bureau. We was basically National Geographic, for example. They were doing the map index. They would come up in a car, and they would give us that week's worth of stuff. They were making the maps of all the entries that went on the maps for that week. We had these row ladies with Freedom perforator operators, typewriters with punch paper tape, and they would type the stuff all up, and with the codes we had, put it into the computer, and we built this database. And then when we had the whole database, we'd sort the thing into the sequence they wanted, and then they actually had their own typesetter, so we sent them back paper tape to drive their linofilm machines.
I'm just puzzled. This is 1963, 64, 65 time period, and then you go on right until the 70s.
Yeah.
When do you replace the 301?
We replaced the 301 with the 360. After we were acquired by Lehigh Press in 1967.
Oh.
Okay, we were living hand to mouth before that.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask you.
Okay,
These are
so-
some pretty significant clients you're talking about.
Yeah,
An RCA 301 in the 1960s is certainly an outdated machine, to
Yeah,
say the least.
yeah, yeah.
But you didn't have the cash to do more. Is that the problem?
That's right. And it was a big deal because everything was in 301 assembler. So when we started to move to the 360 at the end of the decade, that meant rewriting everything, and it meant rethinking everything because we had done this to the constraints of a machine that had no random access storage. When you get random access storage and big memory, everything changes.
Model 30 did you get, or something larger?
Yeah.
Model 30?
Yeah.
That's what I assumed.
Yeah.
So your father started the company with no outside financing, just personal money?
It was friends and neighbors because nobody in the industry would put money into it, and there was no such thing as venture capital then. So that's the problem, was that we were always short on cash because we were always dependent upon money coming in from jobs, and if money payments were late or the job was late, we would, for that week's payroll, we have to pay from the bottom up.
Were you getting a salary?
Yep.
How did you negotiate your salary with your father?
I didn't.
I see. He told you what you were going to make?
We just, he said, he offered me a salary, I accepted. This was not something I was doing because I expected to get rich at it. It was something I was doing because I believed in it.
How many employees did ROCAPPI have during this period before Lehigh buys it?
That's a good question.
You mentioned Weiss.
There were certainly 40.
40 employees. Well, you're including all the people doing.
Yeah,
it
it was, and it could be more than that because we did the National Geographic stuff on the night shift on the keyboarding, so it could be 50.
Who was managing it?
We had people. When I arrived there, we had some people who were ostensibly managing the thing, but basically what happened over time was that they weren't terribly good at what they were doing. I mean, they're from other areas and so forth and didn't have a background. So I ended up taking over gradually a lot of the jobs that
What did your father do?
He was the visionary. He was the outside. He had the ideas.
He was a salesperson in sets or not?
He went out and had customer contact as well. He did a lot early on. He did most of the major contacts with the relationship building with the people who would be our customers.
He would have known them from his previous work there.
Not necessarily. I mean,
really?
Chester County, Pennsylvania Library came out of the blue. The Chrysler Corporation stuff came from a typesetter in Detroit. So stuff came in from different ways, and we were very visible. We promoted what we were doing. We were visible. We were known. At some point, stuff started coming to us.
You mentioned doing a book on the CRT typesetters for GCA. That's what I was wondering.
Okay, so my father had been the executive director of this piece of the Printing Industries of America, the Graphic Arts, the Graphic Arts, it became the Printing Industries of Delaware Valley. Okay, so he was in this environment from the very beginning. That's where he always kept those contacts, and he got the Printing Industries of America. He convinced them that computers were the future for publishing, and they started a subgroup or a sub thing called the Graphic Computer Communications Association, GCCA, that later was shortened to just Graphic Communication Association. And they found a guy named Norman Scharf. I think of his name isn't something I gave you. And Norman became the director of this, and he was the director of it right through into the 1980s, certainly. And he started doing little conferences to promote this stuff. We spoke at those conferences. He wanted to, when I was doing all the research on CRT typesetters for our use, he asked me to do a book on it, which I did, and then a video on it. And I made up a whole test suite they were all pages that ROCAPPI had done. They were all very, very pages that we used as test suite to test out the different machines in terms of speed, quality of production, and we published all of that.
We're 27 years old or so, and you're doing these 26, 27, doing these things.
Yeah.
It's quite an accomplishment at a very young age.
I never thought about it.
You didn't?
No.
Self-confidence is a wonderful attribute, isn't it? I love it. During this time, I'll talk about the being bought out by Lehigh. Relationship with your father.
Basically, what happened was the two of us ended up running ROCAPPI. And I ended up having my bailiwick, and he sort of had his. So we, we sort of worked as a team. But I was always, publicly, I was always the son. Inside the company, I had a lot of, he never questioned, or almost never questioned what I was doing.
You were managing, supervising, directing a lot of people who were considerably older than you.
Yeah.
Was that ever a problem?
No. There weren't the people who were, don't forget, most of the people were not older than me. Because, yes, the ladies who did the perforator operators, they range in age from teenage to a lot of them were mothers, okay? But in terms of the key working staff, you had a programming staff, they were all young.
Of course.
Computer operators, they were young, okay? So the key people who made that company successful were all young.
Interesting, because I was working at GE as a 20-year-old, and I'm on a union factory floor.
Yeah.
And that was a problem. I remember my boss telling me, you either have to listen to their fishing stories or talk to them or you're going to get killed. It's one of those kind of things.
I mean, we had, the programmers were all young, and they all, one of the best programmers I've ever seen was Pat Stuber, who took a programming course between high school and college in the summertime.
So what was the name?
Stuber.
Spell it.
Steuber.
Okay.
His father had been at Los Alamos. Okay. He came from a family, and he took a programming course, freshman between high school and college. Went to Swarthmore College, started working for us, and dropped out of college and was a programmer. And typical, my first exposure to a brilliant programmer who was arrogant because everybody else is inferior to him, and difficult to deal with because of that.
I'm going to deal quickly now. Lehigh, you're cash short. It's got to be
That's right.
tough.
And what happened was, it was Holt Reinhardt Winston, said to us.
I'm sorry, names you have to be clearer on.
Holt Reinhardt Winston.
They published my book.
Okay.
That I wrote.
Said to us, what we needed a steady flow of work. When we had work, we were doing fine. Okay, but the work came in spurts, and they had the low periods. We used the low periods to create the Bible database. Okay, but we weren't getting paid for that at the time. So we need a steady flow of work. But Holt Reinhardt said to us, we have this whole series of stuff we will give to you, but we don't dare, because this is a very vital part of our business, and you're not financially stable. Okay, so if you will agree to be acquired by one of our favorite suppliers, okay, we'll give you the business. Okay, so it was sort of.
It sounds like a forced marriage, a shotgun marriage.
Yeah,
it sounds like.
Yes, right.
So what was the deal when you were acquired?
Basically, we ended up moving from Pennsylvania into a addition that they'd built onto their plant, which
Financially?
Financially, they acquired the company, and which meant that the ROCAPPI stockholders got their money back, but I don't think they made a whole lot of money.
You didn't get stock in Lehigh?
No.
Oh.
No. We were employees.
So you basically just came over as employees.
That's right.
Did they pay you for your technology?
They rescued the company. Okay, and it was instantly successful. It was our big problem was this sort of lack of this steady work. We got acquired, and that's instantly solved.
Well, 67 is
67.
that? So that's when you switched computers?
What happened then, the first thing we did was bought the cathode ray tube typesetter, because that was the thing was limiting us, was the output device. And then started the process of doing the conversion to the 360. And that meant rethinking everything you were doing and say, okay, now the game has changed. We've got a bigger playing field. We've got random access. How do we do it differently?
But you were still going to operate as a service bureau.
Yes. And then we still wrote the stuff in assembler because computer time was still expensive, and we needed to be as efficient as possible. I can remember sitting down with three of us, two programmers and I, sitting down with a calculator and the manual, the 316 manual that had times for all the instructions, debating different ways of doing the main loop of the H&J program, which every character would go through, and therefore had to be efficient, and gaming different strategies for how we did this, and sitting there and figure out what the instruction.
Well, at that time, the 30 wasn't a very powerful machine comparatively.
No.
So you had to you were doing a lot of complex functional stuff.
That's right.
That's correct. So what, you did make that transition during the 67, 68 period?
That was not complete when I left.
You left in 69. Your father was an employee at that point still, or not?
I left in 70, a 3-year employment contract. I left in 70 when it was up. I left at the end of the summer in 1970, and then he left in December 1970.
How did he feel working as an employee in a company like that?
I learned things from it. The first year, we were acquired in 67, and the end of the year, because I had responsible for budget and so I mean basically I was running the company inside of it.
You were still running it as an independent unit.
Yes. Okay. And I got called into the president's office. These were printers. They were rough and ready people. Okay. And they had a company whose stockholders were mostly family members. And John DePaul, the president, said to me, "You missed your forecast for December." Okay, revenue I thought was going to come in December did not come in until January. Okay, and he says that means X number of cents per share for the Lehigh stock. Okay, this is okay, and I've got these shareholders, and they're really unhappy about this. He said, "Don't ever miss a forecast." Okay, you can beat a forecast, but don't ever miss a forecast because we're depending on it. And that was sort of drilled into me, and when I ended up later on running my own company, I did a lot to run that by budgets.
Interesting. Well, budget has the two elements. One's the cost element, one's the revenue element.
Right.
You're talking revenue forecast.
That was revenue forecast.
Okay, I'm going to skip on to the next thing, and this I'm going to make fairly quick. You were with then two companies, Composition Information Systems, and then with AutoLogic.
Yep.
Let's make this a very short thing.
When I left ROCAPPI, I'd previously gone to California on a consulting thing, and had been, I knew we would be leaving. We would love to have gone to the south of France. We would love the south of France, but I couldn't figure a way to make a living there. Went to Southern California and figured that this was really, this is much nicer than living in Philadelphia. And I was offered a job there was a newsletter that was serving this sort of nascent industry called Composition Information Services. And I was offered a job run by one guy, offered a job to come in and basically take over a lot of the stuff of doing that newsletter. He was doing 2 of them. And a chance to move to California. It was good pay, and they paid for a chunk of the move, so he paid for it. So we went to California.
Did you have children by that point or not?
Yes, we had one child. We had Nancy by that time. We had one daughter. Our younger daughter Nancy was born in 67, and Karen, our younger one, was born in California in 72. So I get there.
Those are your 2 children?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So I get there and I start working on this, and it's fun to begin with. because that's, you're gathering all this information. A lot of this stuff was getting press releases and assembling press releases and so forth, but we wrote, it was stuff we wrote. And after some months, he called me into his office and said, he said, I just written something. And he said, yeah, we can't publish this. And I said, why not? He said, we can't bite the hand that feeds us. And at that point, I discovered that he was being paid to provide favorable coverage to, and paid by, and I hadn't encountered this before, but he was being paid by most of the major established companies in the industry. Okay, it was, okay. And at that point, I said, no.
Help me here. You did some writing, obviously, when you were part of ROCAPPI,
Yeah.
but that wasn't a major part of
No.
your work.
No.
Now you take a job in which research and writing is a major
right.
part of your
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
That's a significant change. Here you were running an operation, businessman in
Yeah.
effect,
Yeah.
and now you changed to being a writer, a researcher and writer.
Yeah.
Why? Other than wanting to move to Southern California.
Because my sense was that, I didn't know how to do this yet, but my sense was that I've been a pioneer, okay, but now there are all these other people coming and doing things, okay? So this has become, ROCAPPI was alone when it got started. Okay? Now there's a bunch of stuff happening, okay? And if your focus is you want to be part of a revolution, you want to move things forward, there's a pivot that you have to make, or I feel I had to make, between being a pioneer and being a catalyst. And basically, lots of people are going to do things right now. There's people piling in, ideas coming in and so forth. The thing that's going to be the big thing now is going to be communication, coordinating, getting conversations going, helping this to move along as where other people are doing the work, are actually doing the development. I'm no longer doing development. I have the advantage of having done it before, so I know what's involved in doing it. But now there are lots of people doing it, okay? Being one of those people doing it is no longer compelling to me. What's more compelling to me is being able to be involved with everybody who's doing it.
You're 28 years old, you have one child, and you move out to Southern California. You find out these people are really not playing the game with your set of principles.
Right.
So you leave them.
That's right.
Now what do you do?
What I did at that point was I took some unemployment and I started looking around to do what to do. And I put feelers out and so forth. And what I turned up with was the thing that looked most promising was there was a nascent company in the San Fernando Valley called AutoLogic. It was a spin-off from a company in New York called Alphanumeric. And they were setting out to develop a low-cost cathode ray tube typesetter. And so I became a full-time consultant for them because, they're going to build something, okay? And this is 1/3 the price of anything that had existed before of this sort. It's going to make a huge impact on the industry. And I did things for them like, I invented the command language for it. Because I had a pretty good idea of what these things could do. I wanted to do now finally a machine that would do everything that these things could do. So I invented the command language for it. I work with the guys who are running the control software and this sort of stuff. But then, sort of concurrent with that, my father had left at the end of 70, and we started having conversations with Norman Scharf about doing a newsletter, and I just had newsletter experience. So, but we were going to write books, but then we realized books would be obsolete. Things were moving so fast you couldn't just write a book about it. So we ended up doing the newsletter stuff, and that was a way to be the catalyst, was to write the newsletter.
So this consulting's a relatively short assignment then. Less than a year, probably?
That overlapped with, I was actually overlapped with doing the newsletter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so when I actually came in the newsletter to write the article about the APS-4, the machine that was being developed, right in front. I had to say, okay, there's a conflict here. I had a hand in developing this.
So now, okay, whose idea is it? Yours or your father's? Who really makes it, brings us to?
I don't remember. I think it was a mutual decision.
I guess, let me interrupt. What did your father do after he left about the same time you did? You
He
both
started
had
doing
three-
consulting also.
And who was he consulting for?
I don't recall. Okay, he was doing some consulting on the East Coast.
But you're in California, he's still back in Pennsylvania.
Right.
And what kind of communications do you have during that period?
Phone calls.
Frequent
Yeah.
visits?
Yeah.
So a good positive
Yeah,
relationship.
sure. Yeah.
How does it then, tell me about how an idea, you have an idea of this, your father, does he have that same vision or doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, both of us, we talked about doing books, realized immediately that wasn't going to be the thing. So the next thing was doing the newsletter. He talked to Norman Sharp about it. Norman said, this is great. They would publish it and they would distribute it, and they would pay us a percentage of what they sold, what the subscription price was. And we started doing it. Now, bear in mind...
Tell me again, you were not going to distribute yourself?
Initially, we had a jump start there because GCA had a whole membership, and so they could put it out immediately, and they would get subscriptions for it. And for us, doing the newsletter was not, we're going to make our living doing the newsletter. We were going to make our living doing consulting. The newsletter was our way of pushing the industry forward. It was our way of having this conversation and trying to just advance the technology, advance things, and keep things moving in the right direction. I mean, we did have visions about wanting things to be done right rather than being done wrong. So helping people write a good hyphenation justification program was really important because we know how to do that.
But if you're doing a newsletter and you expect to do consulting, didn't you see a conflict of interest issue?
Our consulting was primarily for users, people who were going to acquire the system. Okay, so most of our big our consulting relation, our long-term relationship, the things that would last over some period of time, those were all for users. Okay.
So who's a user?
Okay, so my clients included Time Incorporated, Justin's American Yearbook, a bunch of different newspapers.
So these are the people who are going to buy these. What did you call them then?
I mean, they were, in our parlance, they were the customers, and the people who supplied the stuff to them were the vendors.
But what were they vending?
They were selling typesetting, computer typesetting systems. They were mostly turnkey packages, and we did for them. We did typically. We did two different kinds of things. We did consulting days, a day here, a day here, a day there. That was mostly a matter of someone has something they're developing, and they want you to come in and critique it, and say, you could do this better, you could do that better. What about this? What about that? Which is entirely in our view, in keeping with our view of trying to move things along. You're trying to help people who are building the stuff build what they should be building for the people who are going to use it.
So in a sense, you were taking what you knew of customer requirements.
That's right.
And applying them against what these other people
and
were trying
helping people map what they were doing to what the customers wanted or needed. Okay, and helping them to do a good job of it rather than a half-assed job of it. Okay, because it's so, the most people who are doing this stuff are going through the learning curve of learning what good typography is, what the quality standards are, what's required, and you got to help them. You got to say, this is what you need to be doing.
It seems to me there's sort of three levels here of what you're talking about. Speaking of structure, but one is you got to make a living.
Mm-hmm. Right.
A newsletter will help get people. But your buyers of the newsletter are going to be the users primarily rather than the manufacturers?
Both.
You expect it to aim at both?
Yeah, you saw in the thing. I mean, everyone's saying. I mean, Lee Lorenzen said, he read the newsletters, and that's how he knew knew he had to do.
But you had that that's in the 80s. I'm talking about the 1970s.
Same
Did you
thing.
have that same vision?
Oh yeah, never changed.
So your market was both the developers and the...
Yeah, we're trying to move an industry along, which means both the people who are developing the product and the people who are using the product.
You really didn't consider yourself, though, part of the computer industry or the software industry, did you?
No.
You see, 1972, IBM is unbundled. There's a fairly significant independent software industry
That's
starting
right.
to develop.
That's right.
But you didn't consider yourself in that area.
No.
There were also companies who were serving them. Welke, with his publications, Gartner Group starts to come in around him.
No, we were focused on, we were trying to move the publishing industry into the computer age, okay? And that meant working with people from the computer side of things as well. I mean, I did, that meant, DEC, IBM, my involvement with IBM didn't come till later, but it did involve involvement with IBM both in New York and in Boulder. So, yeah, I mean, we were involved with all the computer companies increasingly during the 1970s. And
I guess I'm talking about, you mentioned book publishers, magazine publishers, newspapers as well. Were they part of that early picture, or they come later?
newspapers, there's all the stuff happening on the commercial side, which is where we came from. But then in the 70s, the big thing that happened in terms of the new thing that happened was the newspaper systems. And as I said in the sessions, that was really big because you were automating an entire company. The product of the company was produced through the newspaper system. All of the interactions from the people who were essential to all the professional people and right down to the class ad takers, all went through that computer system. It was absolutely the central core of how everything was organized.
Yeah, those are what we call mission critical
Yeah.
applications. And that was certainly mission critical to newspapers.
This is more than mission critical. Mission critical is you've got a whole organization, you've got something like a reservation system. If it goes down, you've got a problem. This was, the entire company was built around this.
But there's other parts of the distribution of the newspapers, the advertising, all these are other elements, the sales elements, all these things. Now,
Well,
it all comes together.
But the advertising was part of this as well. Advertising sale, the classified advertising, those people were salespeople, not ad takers. So you provided them tools, as Richard explained, to help them sell. So what was outside of the system was the outside people who were selling display advertising. And then everything that happened after you had a piece of film that went on to the printing press. The actual distribution of that, putting it onto paper and delivering the paper to your home, that mechanical process was outside this.
So how early is this in the 70s? You're starting your company in 1971.
Yeah.
So by 72, 73, we start thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the ATEX thing, I gave a speech at the National Computer Conference in 71, 72, and these two guys came up afterwards and wanted to talk, and it was Doug Drain and Charlie Yang from ATEX.
We won't cover that now, because we covered that during the desktop publishing meeting.
Yeah.
But apparently, at least Richard talks about you as being the primary force in how they decided what needed to be done and what should be
And
done.
that was my father. Okay, what happened was my father had U.S. News as a client. U.S. News had a huge problem. They were changing printers, and they needed to be able to transmit stuff electronically to Donnelly, to the printing company, on a very tight, in a very short period of time, and they could find nothing that would do the job. So these guys come up and describe what they're doing, and my first thought is, this could be interesting. So I pointed them to my father and to U.S. News, and they went down to U.S. News, and all the relationship at that point was from U.S. News. My father was a consultant to U.S. News. He was paid by U.S. News. But part of what he had to do as a consultant to U.S. News was make sure these guys built a system that was going to be good enough to produce U.S. News. So that meant teaching them what to do to meet the client's requirements.
The ATEX story, which again I'm not going to cover here, is an unbelievable story that three guys who haven't a clue are given the responsibility of doing this complete automation and built one heck of a company over the next 5, 10 years and dominate an industry in terms of the technology. So your father, you were both doing consulting.
Right. We had separate clients. I mean, Time was my client, U.S. News was his.
How are you getting paid by these clients? Time basis?
Yeah, by the day.
You want to tell me what kind of rates you were charging then? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Small numbers.
I mean, I remember thinking, I remember thinking at one point, I need to charge more because I'm paying my lawyer more than I'm getting paid per hour.
That's a good test. Thing. Now, let's talk about the economics of the business in those early years, okay? You're selling your newsletter. At this point, you're actually producing a newsletter.
After the first year, we were producing it ourselves. We took it all in-house.
I guess I had, for record purposes, what was the mission of the newsletter?
As I say, we were trying to push an industry forward. I mean, that was the whole idea, was we were trying to be, and to do that, we were trying to gather, evaluate, disseminate information, and share it.
Let me challenge you on this a minute. It sounds to me like you really, main mental goal was to enable the users to automate their processes. And that's what you were aiming to give the information to the users so they could make intelligent decisions.
We were both, we were focused on the users and the people and the vendors who supplied them because the vendors had to make this stuff. So we were equally focused on both sides of this. Let me give you an example. Company in Sacramento that was the competitor to ATEX at the high end of the nuclear market, called Systems Integrators. I wrote a review of their system, I forget what year it was, and it appeared on time for the ANPA newspaper show where all these people showed their systems. And they got it came out just before the show. And I got to the show, and one of the people who worked for SII took me aside on the first day and said, "Do you know what happened?" I said, "I don't know what happened." He said, "We came into our offices on the Monday morning that your report appeared, and Jim Linnane, the owner of the company, had gone through this and circled every area where there's a criticism of the system and put on the desk of the person responsible for that part of it the thing saying, 'What are you going to do about this?'" Okay. Excuse me. So yes, this was something that you're trying to make everybody. You're trying to help the buyers decide what to buy, and you're trying to make the people supply them better and better and better at what they do, and better, and move people along. I mean, that's what led us to. That's what led me to the Seybold Seminars later on. Was trying to exchange information and move this stuff along.
That's my point, though. There is really a different vision and a different view. Look, your total vision is clear. Go ahead. Yeah. Your total vision is clear. You're trying to move an industry forward, but you do it in two ways. One is providing unbiased, objective information for the users. So they have the basis of making intelligent decisions. Right. Number two, as a result of that, if the suppliers are intelligent and not simply, "Hey, you're wrong, you must be getting paid by somebody," kind of thing, that they will listen to what you say and they will try and improve your product.
And if they ask for advice, we'll give them advice. Okay, if they say, how should we do this? We will say, what about this? What about this?
So that's where that, you have some basic principles, very important.
Yeah.
That's where the potential conflict of interest comes in. You know what everybody's doing.
That's right.
And how do you avoid advising competitor A that competitor B is doing it this way. How do you avoid that?
You can't do that. You cannot do that.
Then how do you advise them how to improve it without taking advantage of what you know?
Because you have to leave out. If you've seen something that can, let's take an example. I go to Xerox PARC, and Gary Starkweather, who's doing the laser printer stuff, shows me this thing he's working on. One of the problems with laser stuff, okay, is wobble. Okay, Gary has had this idea of using a pentaprism rather than a mirror.
Using a what?
A pentaprism rather than a mirror.
Okay.
Okay. A pentaprism can wobble, but since both facets are wobbling, it stays flat. Okay.
Brilliant.
Okay. Brilliant idea. Okay. No one else had thought about it. Okay. I cannot tell or suggest this to anybody else.
They have a wobble problem. They say, what do you suggest I do?
I can't suggest something. Okay. Because that's proprietary information. You've got to draw those walls.
I understand that, but it's a tough line to draw as a consultant, isn't it? They're paying you money for your best advice.
I'm sorry, but this is absolutely, this is absolutely church. I mean, this is absolutely. There are walls around stuff. I could not talk about anything Park was doing until it was public. There's stuff I still can't talk about today that people were doing.
You mentioned to me before we started here that there were some basic things you wanted to make sure we covered as we talked about Seybold Publications. You talked about objectivity.
Yeah.
This is an example of it.
The other piece of it was, from the beginning, and this went all the way through, the other piece of this is just flows naturally. You cannot have either a financial or emotional stake in the success of any of these vendors. Okay.
Never got stock in any company.
No, you cannot. Okay. You cannot morally because how can you be objective if you even if you think you're being objective, there's some subjective, there's forces there. And I could never understand why most people I knew in the computer press were buying and selling stocks of the companies they were dealing with. I didn't understand how you could do that. And you also, you have to have some wall, some separation between how much friends you are with the people. Okay, there are people you like and people you get along with and you'll have dinner with and so forth, but you've got to be really careful that you're not personally biased as well as financially biased.
You obviously had no advertising.
No.
And that's an obvious way of getting a bias, as you had seen from that previous company.
Yeah.
Interesting. You speak also about culture.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by company culture? Go
really,
take a drink.
that really applies when I get to Seybold Seminars.
So that's a later point in time.
Seybold Publications, basically the production operation and so forth was in the East Coast, and my father ran that. Okay. The Seybold Seminars, which we'll get to next, is the next company I had a chance to run myself.
We'll come to that. That's good. Did your father and you both see yourselves as catalysts in a revolution? That was a term you used.
Well, I was always the person who saw things in the sort of grander terms, and was so. He was more. He was more sort of take the next step type of person, and I was the person who always thought in more strategic terms.
Would you use the word pragmatist for him?
Yeah.
And yet he took that leap of faith.
That's right.
Starting the company.
That's right.
Then. Yeah. Interesting combination of things.
Yeah.
You sound like the word dreamers is not quite the right word, but you have vision of what things could be and should be, and you want to make them happen.
That's right.
We'll talk about some examples. Let's stay with publications, and let's stay with the 1970s and try and go through that. So newspapers become the driving force during that period of time?
Well, newspapers were a whole separate thing unto themselves. Okay, that was a whole separate industry, a whole separate world. There were 24 at least people making systems. I mean, they were down to people like One Systems who were building systems for the little baby newspapers.
Did you focus on the newspapers? Did your father, or did you both?
I did. Within our thing, I did the newspaper focus. He did. The only thing that came close to it was his thing with U.S. News, but virtually all the newspaper stuff was stuff I did.
You both did the writing?
Yeah, I always wrote, because he had the production and so forth there, I always wrote more articles per year than he did.
How often did you have how often did the newsletter come out?
It was twice a month, and it was 22 issues a year, because I think there was one we missed we didn't do a second one in December, and we missed one, we skipped one for vacation in the summer.
Summertime, people normally did. And you did this all throughout the 70s, starting what, in 72,
Yeah,
73?
and don't forget, I mean, a feature article was 14, 16 pages, and this is, this is 8 and a half, 11 pages, 2 columns, 10-point type. I mean, there's a lot of text in there, and pictures and everything else. So this was pretty in-depth stuff.
So you're writing 2 of those a month, or 1 of those a month typically?
Yeah.
You have to do the research yourself, or do you have people to help you do research?
We did it ourselves. Now, over time, we built up a staff. What happened is the newsletter circulation grew, because I never took out, from the newsletters, I never took out as much money as I put into them. Because we were doing every month we were doing these tutorial things. We get up in front of people and talk to them and tell them what's happening, which were very useful because it forces you to organize your thoughts and what's happening, and you always changed it. But we got paid for that. That was done through GCA in the U.S., and other people outside the U.S. And that money went into Seybold Publications, and I actually took out less in salary always than the money going in for that.
I'm a little confused on the organizational structure. Tell me a bit. Let me ask you the question this way. Was there a parent company in which there was stock that you all held?
The parent company was Seybold Publications.
Okay. Were there any sub-organizations, or was it just financially, how you kept your financial records?
There was at one point, there was a brief time when we had a Seybold Consulting Group that was a separate organization that was sort of a 2-year, 3-year thing that was organized as part of my father withdrawing from the things in the early 80s. But basically, it was Seybold Publications.
So you talk about keeping your money separate. You talk about the money going back in. I don't understand what you mean.
Because we did these things for GCA, okay, these conferences. There were 2 of us doing them. They paid us so much per person for everybody who came there. So we got paid a percentage.
Did that go into the company or
that
go
went
to
to
you
Seybold
personally?
Publications.
Okay.
Okay, not to us. Okay, Seybold Publications did these things.
How about your consulting practice?
That went to me.
Personally?
Yes.
Did you have your own corporation?
No.
No?
No.
Father?
No.
So you just got direct consulting fees?
That's right.
Ah, so that's how you kept it separate
Okay.
when you talk about
and
the other.
the consulting was our primary source of income.
Gathered that. Next question. Were there, in Seybold Publications, who were the owners?
Owner were my father and myself to begin with, and then later on there were some key employees who got stock. And then when my sister joined, she got some stock as well, and then it got split up later on.
So did your father and you keep the same ownership throughout?
No. No, this was a bone of contention. It was supposed to be a partnership, and he ended up, since he incorporated everything else, and he ended up taking more of the stock for himself. And I rationalize this and say, look, he's got the burden of doing the production. I don't, so that's fair.
And the production was actually producing the newsletter and distributing it.
That's right. That's right. And he had the burden of that. I didn't have that. So as we grew, all that staff reported to him, and so that unequal partnership made perfect sense.
So it wasn't an argument?
No.
All right. Your sister joins when?
I think it was in there someplace. She joins in the mid-70s.
Pardon me?
Mid-70s. Okay, and she joined, and she came out of an office background, and she was really interested in word processing, and that was an obvious thing for us to go into. So she ended up starting a separate publication, which was the Seybold Report on Word Processing, and then became later Seybold Report on Office Systems, because it became more than just word processing.
Was this already during the 70s she started that?
Yeah.
She also a good writer?
Yeah, yeah.
Staffing up. But I'm going to try and get to the end of the 70s so we can move ahead quickly.
Yeah, we staffed up, first of all, for production people in Pennsylvania. And then as we grew, we began to add more editorial people. We began to add people, some staff people in the Pennsylvania office, and then later on as we grew, we began to add people who were doing consulting and writing, but who were not co-located. And they were in New England. We had people in the UK, people in France.
Who managed the business?
My father did.
Okay. Tell me let's get to a change point. 1980? When's there's some transition involved?
1980, we were another inflection point in the industry. The technology was now really coming together that I could see that things were going to move ahead very rapidly from that point forward. So it was just obvious to me that we needed to have some place where the people who were doing this work could come together and exchange ideas and talk. Okay, every industry needs this. We didn't have that, so I created it, and that was Seybold Seminars. And the idea was we get the top people together. We would have sessions. We talk about stuff. We discuss things. Again, the emphasis is on openness and sharing, and us all helping each other. And it was aimed at both the people who were using the technology and the people who were developing the technology, because you want the exchange between them to take place, and you want to encourage users to talk together, vendors to talk together, users and vendors to talk to each other. You want those conversations to take place. So the idea was, you'd start, and that's why it's a week long. You'd start getting everybody together in the same place. You'd have structure. You'd have sessions. You'd have discussions, but you would. The real benefit was going to be what took place outside of that and all the personal conversations. And the way I structured it was that someone would give a presentation, and it was, the rules were no sales pitches. And that was enforced by the fact that after a presentation, the moderator, originally it was me, and as we expanded, we have other people doing the moderation as well, would get up and act as a surrogate for the people in the group, because it was a reasonably sized group, and ask follow-up questions. And then you'd open it to questions from the floor. But people knew that they were going to be asked questions about this stuff, and they knew that they couldn't just say something and then walk off the stage.
Now, was that your business, Seybold
Yes.
Seminars?
That was my business. That was deliberately my business, because publications was basically my father's business. Okay. So I had a chance there to start to build my own business with my own ideas of what the culture should be.
But also what the financials should be?
That was entirely mine.
So, but you were still a part of Seybold Publications?
Yes, and what we did was, because I used publications people as moderators over time, for example. So seminars would pay publications.
Were they two separate corporations?
Two separate corporations.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah. But seminars would pay publications for services the publications provided.
Were you the 100% owner of seminars?
Yeah.
But you continued some ownership in publications,
Yes.
or not?
Yes, I did.
Did you continue to do newsletters and so on?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
How did you find the cycles to do all this?
Well, that's when we get to why I sold the company. As this grew and grew and grew, my frustration basically was that there was the intellectual side of what I was doing, which was the content for the seminars and writing stuff for the newsletters, and there were more newsletters by that time. And so I've got that, which the company's hugely dependent upon. And then I'm trying to be a business person and run a business. And I felt I wasn't doing either job. I felt stretched. I wasn't doing either job to the standards I would have liked.
When is this? Give me a time frame.
That was by 1990 when I sold the company.
That's 10 years later.
That's right. Okay.
So you played both roles for 10 years.
That's right.
Were you getting an income from Seybold Publications?
Again, I was getting basically, I was getting enough income from public, I don't know. Actually, when I started seminars, within the first year or so, what we did was we had a health insurance plan with GCA that allowed us to the printing industries, that was a group health plan thing that we were in. And so publications was under that, and when I had a salary from publications, I qualified for that. And then later, as seminars started to grow, we actually attached seminars to that as well and got our health care through that. So at that point, I was taking no income from publications.
But you still are producing articles for them.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Had you stopped your consulting practice by that point?
I was still doing consulting, but I did less consulting because I had less time for it.
I just don't see how you have time, because let's talk now. I would like to focus on seminars, and then we'll finish up. You build quite a business. Talk to me about the number of seminars you ran, numbers of people coming there, the tie-in with trade shows. Give me some of that picture.
So let me start by talking about sort of vision of what you want to do in a business. So I've seen inside of an awful lot of companies, and you have your own ideas about what you want to do. I had very early on, when I first getting my first employees, my attorney, who'd been my business attorney for some period of time, I went to him and I said, I was wrestling with how I do incentive compensation and deferred compensation things for the employees. And we started talking about this, and employees and so forth. And he told me a story that drove what I did from then on out. He said that he recently had been at some legal conference thing, and he was sitting next to the managing partner from a law firm in Denver that was famous for its collegiality, which is unusual in law firms. And Michael asked him, how did you do it? And the guy said, it's very simple. If I'm thinking of bringing somebody new in, I go back at nighttime, overnight, and I ask myself one question. If I hired this person and brought this person into the firm, would I look forward to coming to work more tomorrow because the person was there than I did today when the person was not there? If the answer is yes, it's the right person. If the answer is no, it's not the right person. And this sort of crystallized my thinking about this. And that's what we did. I never hired somebody on the basis of, I did a few things. Later on, our finance guy and a couple of specialized things. I did look for people who had skills we needed when we needed particular skills. But we never hired somebody on the basis, I never hired somebody on the basis of what they had done. I hired them on the basis of who they are. And that's particularly important when you have a small company and you can't provide, because of everything I was doing, you can't provide the kind of supervision over them that you would if you were just running a company. And people are going to make their own jobs. So you're really hiring the person. You're hiring the person and how the person fits your culture. At one point later on, when we were established with a bunch of people and so forth, we are debating, we have a new hire to make. We're debating which person to hire. And we have a couple of contenders. And there are like a bunch of us sitting around. And someone, I forget who it was, asked the key question. She said, which of these people can you imagine taking their shoes off and walking around in their socks? Now, this was a company culture central question because we all did that, okay? And it was instantly clear to us only one of them met that criteria.
That's an interesting story.
So what happened to us? Oh, and another piece of this was, you're building a business. The people are building the business, and so it was morally the thing to do. You had to do profit sharing. Okay, this was a collaborative undertaking. Everybody had to share in it. What happened as we went along was, as we started to grow and add more and more people, for a few exceptions of specialist things like the finance guy, virtually all the employees were recommendations from existing employees. People would say to their friend, this is a great place to work, you ought to come here, and say to us, okay. And that was golden because this person's been vetted by someone who's known them for 10 or 15 years and who wants them to succeed and wants the company to succeed. We had, over the 10 years from 1980 to 1990, we had one person leave because she was Swedish and her husband couldn't get a work permit in the U.S. He was also Swedish. We had a couple of people that we asked to leave, counseled out, said, you really are going to do better someplace else. Later on, after the 90s, I had a programmer leave because she'd maxed out, and I told her she needed to go someplace else because she was, professionally, she would be stuck if she stayed with us. Nobody else left.
Now you had
Nobody else left.
How many people are we talking about? You built quite an operation here.
It wasn't as big as you think. Seybold Publications, which I ended up having to run by proxy in the later 80s.
Did your father, I guess I would ask that question.
He retired in 83, 84.
And
the company was split up so that my sister had the word processing stuff. We had done a PC newsletter that Patty and I had done, and PC newsletter was given to my brother, and I took the publishing stuff.
So you did, and that's in what, 83?
That breakup was official in 85.
85.
So.
And what does your father do after that? Does he just really retire? Or does
he was really retired. So size of the company, seminars, the actual core people running the business side of things, wasn't as big as people would think. We were, 1990, it was 20-something people. After the Zip acquisition, it was probably went to 30.
Would you bring in temporary people for the seminars?
Well, the seminars,
the trade shows, things like that.
The seminars were the moderators. All of them were people who were writing in the publication.
I see.
Okay, they were. So we had a large staff of people. I'm talking about the business side now. Okay?
Yeah, I understand.
Okay, the seminar people. There were two key people who were in Malibu with me. Craig Klein, who was the sort of second in command for the
K-L-E-I-N or I-N-E?
C-L-I-N-E.
Thank you.
Who was the second in command for the publishing seminars. And then in 1990, when I moved to doing Digital World, I brought in David Barron to do Digital World.
Spell Barron?
B-A-R, 2 R's and 1 R.
So we'll check it out later.
And this is a perfect example here. I brought David in, whom I had, he worked as an intern at one time for us, who actually I'd known him because he was our daughter Nancy's super sibling at Yale. And I seduced him to leave the theater and come work for what was going to be the future, to come to California and do this. But David is a natural networker. He has just amazing talents for networking and bonding with people. And we were moving into having to deal with a bunch of new industries. And I needed somebody who had skills I didn't have in terms of sort of instantly bonding with people and making connections and so forth. He was fantastic at it.
So he came to work for you?
Yeah.
Nancy, did she ever come to work for you?
She worked as a one summer when, early on we were doing the Seybold Seminars in the beginning of the 80s. It was really a family thing. Doing Santa Monica, the kids would show up and help hand out stuff in the beginning, opening session.
I understand that.
We hired local kids to help prepare stuff, and including Michael Penn, who was Sean Penn's brother. Sean was a terrible worker. Michael was a very good worker.
Let me get some statistics on the record, if I might, on the Seybold seminars. Okay. You start. Seminars are what, once a year? How do you start?
So we started out once a year, started February and then moved to March very quickly because we needed time between Christmas and the event to do proper promotion for it. And it was in Southern California.
When was how many people came to the first one?
I can picture the room.
200?
200.
Okay.
Something like that.
And then it grows.
It
By
grows.
1990, how many were coming to the seminars?
By 1990 it was, well, by 1990 we were in Moscone, and we were.
I'm sorry, in with what?
We were in Moscone. No, at that time, 1990 we were in Boston. So Seybold Seminars by that time is probably in the. I don't think it was 1,000. It was in the high hundreds actually coming to the seminar things.
Did you have two then, one East Coast, one West Coast by then?
So what happened was we started with Seybold Seminars on the West Coast in the spring, and that actually we drew people. It was a great time because all the East Coast people and all the Europeans were sick of winter by that time, and coming to Santa Monica or Beverly Hills the first week in March was very attractive to them. Then in 1986, and we had at that point we had a demo area that sort of was growing into a trade show. 1986, with the desktop stuff coming along, I decided we were going to do a trade show with a conference. So the first one was visualized as being a trade show with a conference, and that was going to cost. Total investment for doing that was going to be $250,000, which is all the money I had. Okay, and so it was a complete bet that we could be successful at it. And we didn't have. We were trying to attract an audience that the Seybold Seminars, the audience overlapped with Seybold Publications. People were getting the newsletters and so forth. This didn't. Okay. This was reaching out to a much broader audience. So we did some desktop publishing level type promotion type stuff, and did it. When we,
Excuse me a second.
I just signed the contract for the space at the Hyatt Regency in Barcadero in San Francisco. There's a nice trade show thing down below, a nice conference space up above. And I put the money down. I was now committed for the $250,000. Okay, and went to see. There was a new magazine called Publish, and I went to see who had the promotional vehicle we didn't have. And I went to see the publisher, editor and publisher, to enlist their help. I said, I'll give you some visibility with this. You can co-sponsor it and so forth. And he listened to me and he said, this is a great idea. Okay, we'll do it and we'll pay you to run the conferences. I said, no, that's not the idea. Okay. And he said, if you don't do that, we'll do our own, and we will bury you because we have the promotional reach and you don't. And I said, no. Okay. So we left, and we decided we were going to do it ourselves. At that point, we thought we were going to have this competition. He never got off the ground with it. We did, and we were successful.
How did you contact the desktop publishing user community?
We just started. We did direct mail to trying to get whatever we could get.
An obvious thing would have been.
And Publish, who was the obvious vehicle, would not give us any coverage.
I'm thinking about the companies who were selling to those users. They had the contacts. They knew who they were.
I knew all of them.
Did they help you by giving you names or making? You didn't use that. Would have been an obvious thing.
Because they were selling. They didn't know who they were selling to. Okay. No one knew who they were selling to. Okay. No one knew who this audience was.
So that wasn't the newspapers, it wasn't the magazines,
No.
It wasn't the
books.
books.
It was a whole new class of people who had not been in this sort of thing before. This was reaching out to an entirely new audience.
We've covered, just for the record again, we've covered a lot of what the company did and the tremendous impact it had on the industry in our desktop publishing meetings that we had on May 22nd and 23rd here at the Computer History Museum. So I'm going to give it much lighter than I would normally do in this case. Give me I want to put some numbers on the record because this is of a size and scope that people just won't appreciate.
Yeah.
Trade shows, how many people eventually were showing up at the trade shows?
1993 was at least 40,000. Okay.
And in some of the seminars getting bigger, or
seminar in '93 was over 2,000 people.
So this is a major.
That's multi-tracks, okay. So what happened was the San Francisco one, we ended up doing 2 Seybold events per year because the distinction between desktop publishing and professional publishing was going away by the end of the 90s, okay? As professionals were using desktop stuff. So what happened was we moved the spring one to the East Coast and called it Seybold Boston. It was mostly in Boston, and left the San Francisco one in San Francisco, and that became Seybold San Francisco. There were overlap between them in terms of attendance and people who exhibited, but the San Francisco one, which was more desktop focused, was by far the largest. So, '93 there would have been 40,000 plus people coming to the trade show in San Francisco, and I don't know, 17, 18,000 or so to the one in Boston. So there was a different scale there.
You become the evangelist for the whole desktop publishing industry.
Yeah, I mean, this was, if you go back to what I started with, this is where we wanted to go. This is where you always wanted to go, was that you got closer and closer to being able to give everybody the ability to publish, okay, and break down all of those barriers.
And the technology caught up with your dream.
Yeah, and I had confidence that it would. I mean, I didn't know enough about what was going to happen in terms of computer technology. I didn't know how fast it was going to happen, but I had confidence that knowing a little bit about the sort of physics involved and that we'd find ways to make these things cheaper and cheaper and faster, and the economies of scale as you built more and more computers would suggest that they would get cheaper and cheaper.
Talk to me about the sale. You have still Seybold Publications, you have Seybold Seminars.
Right.
How do you close them out? What do you do?
Well, what happened was that I was getting to the point where I was really, really, really feeling stretched. Okay. At that point, we had the Seybold report on publishing systems, 2 issues a month. The Seybold report on desktop publishing, 1 issue a month. The new publication, which we were just about to start, called Digital World, 1 issue a month. And I'm spending by now most of my time on the multi-industry stuff. Okay? Most of my time is spent talking with all these industries that we're colliding with. Okay? And that was fun. That was the new thing to do. But I've got this whole legacy operation going, and it's also clear that the trade show business, as you mature, is going to be a business in which only a couple survive. Okay? For trade shows to be seminal, they have to be something that they're must-attend events, and that was true as long as there's rapid development in the stuff we were doing. It's going to be less true as things go on, and scale is going to matter. So the other thing was when profit sharing with the employees, there was no exit strategy for anybody involved in the company, including me. Okay? There was no way to any of the people to actually capitalize on what they built. So then I was approached by a company that I'd had offers all along to people to buy the company. I was approached by a company that was a serious company making a serious offer. And I said,
This
okay.
was Zips Davis? No, another one.
Another company. And I said, okay, I think the time is right now in terms of all the things that are going to happen here. I wasn't sure about the company. So I told somebody at one of the Ziff Davis publications who had been poking me for some time, I called him up and said, you've been poking me for some time and now things are in play. Okay, and a day later, I get a call from Bill Ziff. Okay, and so I got proposals from both of them. I ended up picking Ziff because I felt that it was, under Bill, that it was the more compatible of the two companies and would be a better home for the employees. The dollar numbers were about the same. and ended up selling the company to Ziff. What I didn't know was that Bill himself was about to retire and handed on to his sons, who were not Bill.
The company changed dramatically.
It changed
after that.
dramatically.
Did you continue to, when did the sale take place?
1990.
You continued to work on the seminars?
I had a 5-year employment contract.
Ah.
Okay, which I continued to do for 5 years, and then sort of a 2-year non-compete thing after that.
Were you paid well then, as now you became a manager working for Ziff Davis?
Yeah, and that was fine at the beginning because they left us alone, and we could grow the thing. And then what happened was, and this was, what year this was, the real crux came. First of all, they never understood digital world. And I felt that was the future of the industry, the future for Ziff Davis, that this is where things were going to go. And that was a gold mine that we were the first to do this. We were the first to bring people together, top people, senior executives from all the industries that were colliding. Previous to that, they never met each other. They didn't know. They talked different languages. There was very little communication between them. It's like they were different worlds. And the idea was now to bring these people together because you're all going to collide. You're all going to be common technology and common standards. And you better pay attention to that. And the thing that was neat about that was that almost immediately, the people involved, this is sort of leading edge people doing this stuff, immediately, one of the things that happened in that conference that never happened to me before was people began to really worry about the moral and sociological impact of what they were doing. Okay. They could see it, the change was going to be profound. They could see good stuff and they could see the bad stuff. And we ended up with a bunch of really interesting sessions about the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. But
Bring it to a close on that one.
But Ziff didn't understand this. Okay, so and they only understood. They had a model in which you have salespeople. We never had a salesperson. Okay? We never had a single salesperson. Anything. If people wanted to exhibit in the trade shows, they called us. They called us because they wanted to do it. We had service people. We had people. The people who were in the trade show side spent a lot of effort training the trade show managers for the different companies. You know, they camped for them. They trained them. Our PR people, we had 2 PR people, their job was to help the press and to help the PR people in the various companies and to make the connections and to help people write stories and get the information and so forth, not promote us. So Ziff wanted to bring in salespeople to sell more space in the exhibits. They wanted to do all things the Ziff way. And that, so that started to happen already. But then they decided that they'd acquired 2 companies about the same time. One was in the Bay Area with a culture that never worked and wasn't working. And they thought, well, we need to combine these 2 companies for efficiencies, because they always thought bigger was more efficient. And if we bring the Seybold people up, then that culture will prevail. But it didn't. You can't.
So this is in the 93, 94, 95 period?
Yeah.
Okay. So 95, your 5-year contract is up?
That's right.
And you leave?
Yeah. I came back and did a appearance at Seybold San Francisco once or twice after that. I think 96, 97 probably. But I wasn't really involved with the company.
I'm going to have to make this, we're going to extend about 10 minutes,
Okay.
and then we have to get moving. After that, you seem to have been doing a number of things. You started a company called PGP Inc. What was that?
Pretty good privacy. Basically, I'd known Phil Zimmerman from conferences and so forth, and it's a really interesting story of starting that company. But basically, I was concerned, as a lot of other people were, that we were losing privacy in a digital world, and that the obvious way to try to protect that is to give people the ability to encrypt information. And that's what PGP did. That was a really interesting experience in Silicon Valley during the late 90s when everything was driven by money. I hated it. The culture was just, the culture had gone.
Did you close it down after a couple of years, or what did you do?
What happened was, basically, I'm trying to, I don't want to blame anybody on the record, but we had a president who believed that you get big or you die. You get big fast, and who believed that the next round of money was coming in, and therefore he could spend everything he had. When the next round of money didn't come in,
you were not business. Yeah.
We
had a number of those in the software industry.
Okay, and it was, you know, this again, it was all money driven. It was a belief you could, you know, that you could raise this money and you could keep spending the money, and you didn't have to pay attention to it, and that was wrong.
You've done a lot of work, and again, I hate to cut this short, but you spoke about the nonprofit work you did.
Yeah.
And just you mentioned the College of Santa Fe.
I tried to help save the College of Santa Fe, which was failing at the time. We didn't succeed, and it had to be sold off. But that was part of it. And then I was also involved heavily in I pretended I was an organization, but I wasn't. It was just me pulling together a bunch of stuff in Santa Fe to get a bunch of land out of private hands into public hands and develop for trails. And that was fun because that meant working with all these different nonprofit organizations, the state legislature, the city, the county, all this sort of stuff.
You certainly had enough money from the sale of your company,
yeah,
and for the whatever you've been getting in the way of salary and so forth, that economics were no longer a concern.
I mean, if I had stayed in if I'd been in Silicon Valley in the 90s, I could have made a ton of money. But from the sale of the company, we had enough that I didn't have to work again. I wasn't going to buy jet planes and make multi-million-dollar contributions to things, but I had enough money to live on comfortably. That's all you need.
And you moved to Santa Fe as a primary residence then?
Yeah. And the other thing I was involved in was another startup company that did actually these glasses, which are focusing eyeglasses.
What does that mean?
As you age, in fact, when you're born, about 3 months after you're born or so, you can focus to like this distance. As you age, your eye is less and less able to focus. You notice it in your 40s when you can't read text without having reading glasses. It continues until about age 65 when it sort of bottoms out. The only solution for that is basically to have glasses, different prescription for different distances, or put them all into one glasses, which means probably progressives like you're wearing. Okay.
Which I can't wear because I get dizzy.
Okay. But what you really want to do is have a pair of glasses that focuses the way your eyes used to focus. Okay. And people have been trying to do that for a century. One guy succeeded. These are the glasses. And this is the first ones around. We learned, we built a company around that. It was a very successful company. It was growing rapidly. Customers loved it. We were selling stuff mostly on the internet. You buy them and you can exchange them. You don't like them, and almost no one returned them. But we could not get any venture capital money. We funded with friends and family. We were on a path to break even. We were less than a year from break even, and we could not get funding. We had a deal to sell the company to a major international company that fell through because a 43-year-old guy in management didn't see the need for the technology. Okay, and at that point we decided we'd pull the money out and we would just...
Where are the patents and stuff?
Patents are sitting in a shell company right now. Okay, and we actually had designed for glasses which are indistinguishable in appearance from normal glasses and about the same weight and can be manufactured for costs that are only a few dollars more than doing progressive lenses.
Could they have to be circular, or can they be?
these were circular to get the best possible vision. No, you can do, what you can't do are ones that are thin and rectangular, because this involves deforming the surface, and you can't do that very well. But you could do most other shapes that you see.
Jonathan, I could spend another 2 hours with you easily, and I'll threaten to do so maybe sometime if you misbehave. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.